Alright, time for another draftphysics.com. Debatephysics.com also, but seeking somebody to debate. Some idea, some thought, some statement. Can't get any of those. You can't get any representation of what the counter argument would be. I mean, I could try to invent it. I could try to say, I ain't related to no monkey. I mean, it's like a counter argument against evolution, in my opinion. It's really hard to conceive of the rational counter argument to the simple argument that physics has drawn conclusions based on way too insufficient evidence. I mean, they've just taken the tiny glimmer of a seems like or looks like, might appear to be like, and decided that's all the evidence they need. Um, so I've tried to compare this to a trial, like somebody's accused of murder, and there's some circumstantial evidence. And this has happened with people, where witnesses have said, yes, it looks just like the guy. Well, mostly, and they, it just happens that he looks a lot like somebody else. And, it's a famous case of I guess it was some sort of kissing bandit, some sort of, I don't know, charming bank robber or something. And it looked just like a local priest, in Philadelphia. And, all the witnesses says he did it. He did it. He didn't do it. Anyway, so, I mean, the fallibility of, humans, and this should be acknowledged. And there's just no willingness for people to acknowledge that maybe physics jumped to some wrong conclusions. And that, over time, we've acquired skills and abilities through technology to, better test those conclusions. And as I've sort of pointed out, there appears to be absolutely no interest in those better tests. There just seems to be interest in taking the technology and trying to create some new abstract, complicated way of doing something to verify what they want to prove. They want to go find dark matter. Well, they'll find some way to contrive an experiment that looks like they found it, but no. So it's all quite depressing and irritating. Uh, you know, it's sort of like with the gravitational wave argument. They say we did it, but theoretically it's strangled. I mean, you have to really, you know, uh, distort your view of you know, the elementary facts to make it possible. I mean, Einstein pointed out there's not enough energy in the gravitational wave. We're not going to be able to detect it. Um, and so they had to come up with some excuse, some way of saying that because these things do a certain thing, that somehow they make bent space. They don't make photons, they don't make other kinds of radiation. They somehow make, gravity. They create it, some sort of extra amount. They convert matter into, okay, literally convert matter, electrons and protons, into bent space. So now they have enough energy. It just doesn't, it's kind of pathetic. So anyway, the obvious ones are kinetic energy and the two-slit experiment. These are foundations for so much of their physics, and they're just kind of obviously, you can point out obvious defects in the logic defending both of these concepts as being the truth. They have no, I mean, in one case there's just nothing defending it. And in the case of the two-slit experiment, there's a tiny similarity that, where you could argue the particles are behaving wave-like, but it's just so tiny, and it's much better understood as just being scatter. And but nothing. No rational defense of that slop as being a good foundation for conclusion drawing. But anyway, so I did, more videos doing this debating thing, and we'll see if anybody can respond to it. I mean, if there's no going to be any, if you can't even present a counter argument and have it, rationally debunked in some way, or some counter argument provided, there's just nothing you can do. It's a brick wall, and it's stupid, and it shouldn't exist, and it's not good science to say we're just not even going to bother dealing with counter arguments and evidence. And the evidence is sort of obvious in the case of the kinetic energy argument. I mean, simple devices like levers prove it has no viability. It can't theoretically be the truth. And the counter argument is nothing. Crickets. So, alright. So a couple of little just whatever update notes. So there is the debate page, and I have put the latest kinetic energy video, I'll Debate You, which is the kinetic energy one. And I put the 2-slit video up and the bent light video, and we'll see if there's anything. I mean, I don't care. Text, anything, any comment, anything. Okay, stating some reason why or some point in the video where I said something inaccurate and that can't be true and blah blah blah. And that you have some reasoning or evidence to provide, counter evidence, to point that out. But I mean, it's been 2 years of this kinetic energy thing, and there's just no counter argument provided, nothing on the subject. They're not even spouting their F equals MA. They're not even trying to do their derivative crap, because they know the derivative crap isn't going to explain how levers work. So nobody accepts the challenge to explain how a lever is a free energy device, in the sense that it obviously will convert one amount of kinetic energy into another amount of kinetic energy, either going negative or going positive. And obviously if it's going positive, it's creating free energy. It's just, I don't know. There's just nothing to say except, well, okay, there's just no point in making the argument. So anyway, also, for those who for some reason would care, if you scroll down on the home page, the video home page, the video that is the home page, there's all this old writing that I have to fix. But I did put a listing of all the videos that are on the draft physics, that I put on the separate website. So, most all of them are there, and there's a little link, so you can, but why would you go backward in time? There's just no point in doing it, okay? I don't think there's, I think the current arguments are the best arguments, and those are the ones you should deal with. Sure, you could go back 3 or 4 years and probably find something I said that was in fact wrong, or incorrect, or not completely accurate, blah blah blah. But it only gets more and more precise and better with time. So if you're going to respond on the subject, I would prefer you respond to the current videos. But anyway, just for FYI purposes. So we'll play some of this and see if there's, just point out the arguments. So the most recent one is woo physics. Yeah, there's so many woo subjects like dark matter and gravitational waves and all that crap. But it's really just about the foundation that's fucked up, right? The abolishment of three-dimensional space. I mean, so quantum physics doesn't believe in physical space. They don't believe in physical distance. They think it's all some sort of illusion or abstraction, and that somehow things can function in their own space, and it doesn't have to be connected to any kind of absolute space. And so everything can be in little contracted dream worlds, or I don't even know. I don't even know what to do with that. The idea that there's no absolute space is just an absolute distance in the universe. I mean, there's nothing you can do with that. It's just too silly. I just can't believe that Einstein wasted his time. Sorry, wasted his brain. Contriving such a mechanism that would make it possible for somehow something to be in a contracted space, but it's not viewable from other space, and to be fooled by something as, to be playing with an idea that's just so obvious as, yes, it takes time for us to get information. An event happens, we see it, okay, sometime later. Every single thing you're looking at, you're not looking at it right now. You're looking at it at the speed of light to transmission of the information. So, what is this, the fact that I'm closer to one thing and further away from another thing? Yes, of course, I'll see one thing before I see the other thing. Doesn't mean I changed time, or that the time of the event is different, that they happened at a certain time in space. There's a real clock ticking somewhere. There's a real space clock, okay, clicking off seconds, and every single photon in the universe is clicking off those seconds at exactly the same amount of distance per the click of the second. How can some light be going faster and some light be going slower? I mean, it just, I don't know how people buy it. Why they buy this crap. Well, anyway, so that's a huge one, right? I mean, abolishing three-dimensional absolute space, that's a big leap. And again, they don't have any hard evidence for this. They just say things like GPS. GPS just proves you can break clocks. It doesn't prove that time changes. Ugh, Jesus, I don't know. Anyway, alright. So we'll play some of this. I gotta fix the sound. I was gonna pause to do that, but I just couldn't care. So I won't. It's just no point. You are. Most of the people interacting are hostile to my arguments, and yet they can't put that hostility into any kind of reasoned argument, and it's just shit. What do you say to that? Shit. There's really good reasons not to believe it. The fact that there's so little really tangible, viewable, seeable, touchable evidence. Yeah, so none of these experiments, they don't blueprint them in any way. There's no real information about exactly what this does and that does and that does. So they have 17 elements in the experiment, all kinds of devices measuring all kinds of stuff. I mean, look at CERN. I mean, the idea is you're looking at a bubble chamber, a cloud chamber, and you're trying to see how things behave. But look at all that technology to view, what's in the background of this image, little things shooting out of stuff. And you're saying, well, why do they need all that crap to do this, to see that? So, obviously the reasons are because they need the crap, because the crap is synthesizing reality. It's not viewing it. I mean, they invented a microscope that essentially does that, the telling microscope, blah, blah, blah. And it's really just a theoretical microscope. It's not actually, it's creating based on their diagram of what their expectations of an atom would be. But they're not actually viewing anything in real time and actually seeing what it actually is. And then they have the picture of the black hole, same thing. It's a synthetic, photograph. It's not a real one. Anyway. And, you should want a little better evidence than what they give you to believe the extraordinary claims that there aren't things like three-dimensional space and real distance in the universe. That things are a real distance from each other. and they have real movement in 3 dimensions. Land here and some percentage of land here, and they took that idea like a million of. Okay, so I'm just doing a brief on the entanglement and superposition, that somehow an object is moving and we're supposed to believe that these little objects don't have a position, that they're somehow traveling in all directions that are in the realm of possibility, and that somehow they don't know where they're going, that they don't have any real interaction with the universe. And I sort of made the counter argument that of course if you understand anything, I mean, even if you believe in an ether, you'd have to understand that, well, every time they move through the ether, they're being photographed, they're being measured. The ether is measuring them. So if there's an electric field and a magnetic field, you'd have to argue that those fields are recognizing their motion every time they move. Especially if it's a charged object, you have to concede, yes, their movement is de-entangled all the time. They can't escape the field. So how could they possibly travel from point A to point B without interacting with either the magnetic field or the electric field, if you believe in these field things, or the ether, or in what I'm arguing, in the dense field of energy that's in the universe? No, they couldn't escape it. They could never be in the superimposed state, because it'd be constantly interacting and therefore leaving a crumb trail of their passage through the stuff. It has to be some kind of bullshit that, an eyeball has to be looking at it. Yeah, so then, I'm just pointing out how, look at what all the damage has been done by this wooey talk. I mean, people actually believe that we have to actually see the photon, or the event doesn't happen. I mean, just too ridiculous. It's so bad. And that's what this sloppy, reckless, unevidenced mush leads to. People just invent a version of the religion. I mean, every Christian is essentially a different Christian, because they all have a different image of what Jesus was doing here, Alright, so I think we have a winner here. Anyway, so they take light going in. Alright, we'll say it's ultraviolet light. Alright, so it has... Alright, so this is the whole crystal splitting photon. So this is the right hand, left hand glove kind of argument. That there's no entanglement, there's no communication between objects. It's just that how you created them is how they are in the universe. And that's why one is right hand and one is left hand. Is because essentially an electron was doing this, and every time it went this way, it created a dash over here and a dot over here, and then every time it went this way, it created a dot over here and a dash over here, send it that way. So the two signals are out of phase, and that's all. The two things you're creating are exactly like each other, except completely inverse phases. In terms of when they're dashing and when they're dotting. And that's what you measure as an outcome. It isn't that you found the right hand glove and, that made the left hand glove. When you decided this one was right. No, it was right from the start. It wasn't any doubt about what hand it was going to be. And the other one was going to be 180 degrees different. A certain frequency, time, in this case between 90, what you would call jump ahead. Ended here. That some worm flew on an asteroid, right? A little worm. Oh, so all these different theories, and so look, all this people speculate all this kind of crap, and you're just saying, and you can argue it, and but no one argues any of this stuff. That people just say it like as if life traveled here as a complex life form, or one of these indestructible little monsters, whatever they call them. Shit. See, I just can't stand that happens, but I have to stand it. Memory just doesn't work as well. What are they called? Well, there's extremophiles, something like that. So yeah, these little tough organisms, and that somehow they landed here on Earth, and we evolved out of them, but somehow they also evolved backwards. I mean, yeah, no chance. They, yeah, they evolved backwards. No, that didn't happen. I mean, does atmosphere, the fact that there's a bunch of charged particles of air that are interacting with surfaces, and they're going to interact in a back and forth manner, by the way, hitting and bouncing off. Just speculating. So these are experiments they haven't done. So we don't have a whole bunch of, like, from the space station. There's no TV show you can watch that has all the interesting little experiments done in, nice absolute vacuums, very strong vacuums anyway, of space. And so yeah, experiments like the two slit, we don't have variations, not nearly enough to kind of tease out what might be really happening. What happens if you charge the surfaces? What happens if, there is a vacuum and there's no air? Does it change the pattern at all? That would be really useful information. But we don't have any of that. The fact that we're robots, Yeah, well, I always throw that in. So, the big conclusions, all this little physics leads to end conclusions. And I guess that's what I'm frustrated with, is that all these fake atheists, these people who believe in science, they're really just phantasmagoricals, searching, chasing unicorns, and hunting rainbow gold. They have no realistic understanding of what the consequence of this mechanical universe is, and but maybe they have some hint of it, and that's what they're running from. They're running from a universe that's not going to have, a whole drama, space drama. They're not going to go interact with the aliens and have adventures and all of that bullshit and use their little lightsabers and blah, 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 fight Darth Vader. None of that shit's going to happen. But they want it. And they want it rather desperately to be the truth. For whatever reason. I don't know. Cause I can't imagine why they're willing to be, just sacrifice the truth and logic, to support just such a mushy, silly little story. So it's just as mushy and silly as religion. And the ultimate truth is it's a mechanical universe. We're just a mechanical byproduct of mechanical processes, and everything we say and do is, frankly, just a determined outcome. All the little events lead to, every event. Everything has a course. There's, the asteroid that's going to hit, the next asteroid, big asteroid that's going to hit the Earth. It's already on its way. It's already got a whole millions of years of history, probably. Okay. And yes, there's going to be an event, and it's going to be a cause and effect event. It's not going to, God isn't going to do it. Magic doesn't do it. It's all just a byproduct of bumping particles. And I guess they just don't like that answer. It's just so depressing. Yes, it is depressing. Didn't realize it was going to be depressing. I thought having a science conversation was going to be interesting. I didn't think it was going to be depressing. I thought it would be some work. I'd have to do all this research and all this crap, and but I've done my job. I've done my half of the deal, and it's the other parties that aren't doing theirs. Again, I have a $2,000 challenge right here. I mean, it's still there. $2,000. I'm offering to all these channels that won't even say my name, won't make a counter argument, won't deal with any of these arguments. And there's 3 times as many as the ones listed that I have emailed, and I can't get a single one to respond. Nothing. It's just disgusting. It's disgusting. Anyway, on to bent light. All right, so this is the Eddington experiment. You know, the gravity isn't a real thing, and you know, it's some sort of bent geodesic, and somehow it bends light twice as much as regular matter. So whatever you think is causing something to fall, right? I mean, it seems kind of obvious that, you know, you say push or pull, and then you say, well, pull is complicated. You have to somehow grab it and then pull it, you know. Where push is really easy, that I just throw something into a river and it gets pushed. You know, so many ways I can push something. You know, it's just hit it with something and it's pushed. And so the idea that the universe has a bunch of stuff in it, you know, photons, microwaves, all kinds of stuff is bombarding everything in space, you could sort of understand why things would get pushed together. Because there's a bunch of energy on the outside, undoubtedly. I mean, it's undeniable. It's raining energy. It's just undeniable that the Earth has more energy hitting it from the outside than it produces back. And that's the reason why there's gravity. And it's the energy on the outside. It's pushing. And it's kind of simple. But no, we have to make it some sort of bent geodesic. So the point would be is that energy doesn't interact with energy. Okay, you can't use magnetism to bend any kind of any kind of photonic style force. You can't bend magnetism with magnetism. You can't bend anything with anything, right? And all of a sudden we're saying, okay, it's okay, you can bend light with gravity. So it's sort of violating the rule that the stuff moving the speed of light doesn't affect other stuff moving the speed of light. It has to use a piece of matter. There's no force interacting with force. The force has to reach. A photon has to go across space and hit you. You know, you can't send photons and have them bang into each other and then get a reflection or something. There's no way to bang forces into forces. And yet we're going to violate that rule and violate it in this nutty way where we're going to say it's bent twice as much. And yet the evidence sucks. 400 times better resolution from space. I mean, I've been through all this stuff. I mean, it's just ridiculous that it hasn't been done from space. That there hasn't been any effort to redo this basic experiment that makes this another bold assertion. And really terrible evidence. And that's okay. That's good science. Terrible evidence is good science. And it will be curved. Alright, so just pointing out some of the logistics, and then I put little flames on the sun and point out how you can't go right next to the sun because there's a whole bunch of crap around the sun. And the crap will scatter the light, and when it's scattered, it means it goes to every location. So from every location, you'll see it as bent. You'll say, oh, the light was bent. Well, it wasn't bent, it was scattered. Just like the atmosphere is doing now. I can go anywhere. You know, the sun's pointing this way, and the rays should just be here. But no, I can go anywhere, and I can see the light from the sun as it bounces off other parts of the atmosphere. I see the light coming from the clouds. I see it coming from all kinds of places it shouldn't be coming from. How did it get there? Well, it bounced off of matter. It reflected and refracted. It didn't get bent. It's really, we have the technology. You know. So I mean, look, 400 times better resolution. You know, the numbers. I just put down what these little tiny number differences are. But again, just completely incredible evidence. Nothing credible. They had the best possible eclipse, in 2019 or whatever it was, 2018. Best you could possibly have. 100th anniversary of the experiment, almost to the day, a year off. And and they didn't do the experiment with a decent telescope. It doesn't make any sense. And again, you can do it any time you want. You don't need an eclipse from space. 400 times better seeing, and you don't need an eclipse. And with all our satellites and all our technology, they've never done it. And that's credible science. shit. Trajectory of adding those two vectors, and that's what you're doing. So yeah, this is the original definition of superposition, was the fact that things acquire their influence independently. So for an electron, it really is a universe where they can both be going this way and going this way. They can have two independent forces acting on them. And it's only when there's a conflict, when the forces are coming from the same direction, that the electron has to do the math, you know, where it does the subtractions. But all the others are additive. So as long as this isn't affected by this, they are independent of each other. And that's how things interact. That's how gravity does, in fact, actually work. The gravity, the influence of one thing's existence, the force doesn't happen, doesn't do anything until it travels the actual distance. I mean, you're feeling the gravity of the sun, 8 minutes after the sun produced it. I mean, it's a real force moving at a real speed. It's not instantaneous, it's not a bent geodesic. Why would a bent geodesic move at the same speed as light does? Come on, these are obvious good points. And the fact that you couldn't care less. Good point, you don't care. So back to the Einstein kind of argument with the sun. So you have a sun radiating and it's moving the light back, it's moving pieces. So the whole point is that every time you move an electron, you're essentially consuming some of the energy of the universe, because the electron moves slower than the photon that's in fact pushing it. And so it's taken a little bit of the energy off the photon for the period of time the photon is actually pushing it. The bit of energy, the quanta. So anytime something does this, it's using up a bunch of energy, because in a sense it's not pushing in any one direction, it's just oscillating. And every time it's doing this oscillation, the fact is if I didn't have the piece of matter there, the force would have traveled a lot more distance. So if the forces that are moving the matter aren't moving matter, they go a lot further, okay, in the same amount of time. Kind of obviously indicating they would have had more energy if they didn't have to waste their energy making a piece of matter go from point A to point B and then back to point A. Kind of obvious. And that's all you need to explain gravity. The Earth is hot. It's used up a bunch of energy moving little bits of matter. And the movement consumed, in a way, energy out of the universe. Wider the cone will get, right? So it's basically a way of telling distance. Alright, so this, I was talking about beam splitters and the interferometer, so it's not exactly the bent light subject, but it's just sort of pointing out how, these are the rules of what photons do. And they don't even pay any attention to what their own knowledge base says. They don't even, they say, oh, we're going to have a half-silvered mirror. What's a half-silvered mirror? Where it's a bunch of gaps, with empty space and then stuff, and then empty space and stuff. It's a bunch of slit experiments. Well, what happens in slit experiments? Oh, light spreads. They don't pay any attention. I mean, the logic is obvious that the beam splitter in that form is not making two equal beams. One beam is spreading throughout the whole experiment, the other beam isn't. I mean, a critical point that needs to be countered. You're seeing less light. The slit diminishes how many photons you'll get. So again, the real point is that yes, the light's being broken by interactions. And the fact is that you can break the photons, that is, break the sequence of the little ... And the fact is you can reclimate it. You can do another process that puts it back in phase, that puts it back to its original condition. So you can break a photon and then remake a photon out of the pieces. Simple argument. Or atoms are moved by the speeding bullet. than are moved by the recoil of the gun. Yeah, so that's the kinetic energy argument. And such. So, okay, we'll do the two slits, which sounds like we're already somewhat on, but it really wasn't the same video. So I'll go through this a little quicker because we've been over this so many times. Opening. And this pattern itself doesn't match. Okay. Right, so two water waves can't make the actual double slit experiment pattern. The actual pattern that has the envelope. Two patterns built into it. They've never explained it. They don't have any Dr. Quantum video that explains it. The Dr. Quantum video, like all the other videos, just cheats and pretends it's just bars. Doesn't pay any attention to the exact geometry of those bars, and the geometry is everything, because the geometry is how you create the notion of interference. Is completely dependent on geometry and the length and distance that lights are traveling, and that's how you're changing the phase. And it clearly doesn't work. Two waves can't create the actual pattern unless you have infinitesimally small openings, which again is just saying I'm taking the two scatter points and I'm putting them so close together that you won't be able to tell the difference between the two. They'll look like one scatter point. I can't make a wavelength of difference because the foundation of my triangle, my two lines, the foundation is so they have a word for that. No, it doesn't matter. It's too small. The base of the triangle is way too small. Can't make length differences in the lines. Not possible because the base of the triangle is too small. I mean, these are, very simple and very decisive arguments. And they won't be countered. And now you'll knock the thing over because all four will be hitting at the right time. So it's just about sources. So you have a source and another source and another source and another source. And the fact is if all those sources are throwing pieces and you have the right distances, they'll create a photon. They'll remake what they broke at the surface. So at the surface, something that has a wholeness is broken into pieces, and the game is you're just saying you kind of have a 50-50 chance that you can put the pieces back in phase. That is, you can create distances where they're all a wavelength of difference in their distances. A multiple of a wavelength of difference. And if they're a multiple of a wavelength of difference, you have a remade photon. If they're not, then the pieces aren't showing up at the right sequence. The dashes are showing up when the dots need to show up, and it doesn't work. It won't make a visible photon. That simple explanation works completely. I mean, it's quite satisfactory, quite complete as an explanation. But they don't want to hear it because that's a particle theory. This stuff like this pattern is mysterious. And all right, so yeah, the whole time for the years I studied this, you get confused because they tell you all this stuff and you don't realize how simple it is. They pretend that we don't know how many bars there are. They pretend it goes for infinity because it's a flat screen you're putting it on. All that stuff is all pretense. You can know exactly how many bars there are in the arc. You can know exactly how big they would have to be based on the distance. The geometry dictates it. The triangles dictate it. There's only so many triangles you can make where there's a full wavelength of difference. A full multiple of a wavelength of difference. And so you already know. As soon as you know how big the slit is, you know exactly where the bars are going to be and how many they're going to be. And it's just really annoying that they don't explain it that way, because waves are different. Waves don't have waves are infinitely divisible, so to speak, where triangles aren't. The geometry isn't. Distance, whether it be the slit opening or the impediment, is deciding the so the furthest distance is 2 point sources. From the furthest distance, you have the biggest triangle. That means you have the most little points where you have a full wavelength of difference in the lines, the two side lines of the triangle. So that's all you're doing. So a small base, no, very few, none. If it's small enough, there's no difference between this line and this line because there's no difference in the base. Lines can't be different length because there's not enough base in the triangle for there to be two different sized lines. It has to be essentially the same point source. And that's all it is. Again, it's the whole geometry is point source geometry. It should be honestly stated that there's no wave function here. There's no wave math. The math is geometry, and the geometry just has to do with these simple distances, not waves. There's no wave in it when it is. And it just proves their whole, and again, this experiment is what they're using. They're claiming. So it's a really simple experiment. Anybody can do it to some extent. I mean, obviously, the better you do it, the better the results, and the more perfect the bars and all that kind of crap. Blah blah blah. But yeah, the fact is that if you do it honestly, the two-slit experiment creates two patterns superimposed on each other, two different patterns, and the two patterns can be simply understood as one pattern is being created by the furthest distance between 2 points, the little bars, and the big envelope is being created by the shortest distance between two sources. And you understand that you need a contribution from all four sources to actually say there will be light at a location. And where all four sources aren't in phase, there won't be light. And that simple explanation completely works. Completely satisfies the conditions of a good answer. Alright, that's the end of the video. Alright, so this is the kinetic energy one. I guess I probably should write it over this icon. I really should make an icon for that. Yes, I probably should do that because these videos are all sort of related to each other. Alright, time for another drift. So, so it started because some guy just says, I'll debate you. He doesn't put up anything. The easy way to debate me is just make a video. Or you could write something in your comment. Or you could do something. But to do absolutely nothing and say, I'll debate you, what the fuck is that? It's absolute nonsense. So, it's pathetic. Other than matter. And, alright, so, we'll just get to it. So there's the lever argument, the pressurized vessel argument, the gun argument, right on its face is just saying, okay, you've already violated Newton's third law. You don't have an equal and opposite reaction. You have 2,000 joules in the bullet, and you only have 2 joules in the gun of energy. How is that an equal and opposite reaction? Of course it's not. You've got this huge disproportion. You've got a ton of energy going one way in the universe and almost none going the other way in the universe. How's that an equal and opposite reaction? It can't be. It can't be understood to be. It's just absolute bullshit. And yet they keep defending this nonsense. And so I just point out the obvious, that look, momentum says they both have the same energy. The fact is the gun is big, okay? It has lots of atoms, 1,000 times more atoms, and those 1,000 times more atoms will push on the universe, and it's going to push with 1 pound of pressure. And the opposite for the bullet, all right? It only has the 1 atom, and it's going to push with 1,000 pounds of pressure. That kind of simple analogy fixes it and makes it all completely understood. It's momentum. There's no kinetic energy. The bullet's small. The gun is big. Okay, they're going to move energy. They're going to move matter. The bullet's going to move a small amount of matter. The gun is going to move a lot of matter. Duh. They add a 1/2 in front of the M. And so yeah, I go through the history where they just invent. So it's invented by Leibniz, then it's recreated by the silly experiments in the 1740s. That nobody really analyzed, nobody did any thinking. They just said, oh, it seems like, it sure does look like, and that's all they needed was a little tiny looks like. Well, that's good enough. We don't need to do real physics. We don't need to understand why it looks like, and why it doesn't not consistent with everything else we know. And so even though they had no evidence it takes 4 times more fuel to go twice as fast, they went ahead and started believing it. Stop being good. Anyway, so if you do all this stuff in space, you'd find out that, yeah, I throw something in space and all of a sudden the work equation says this is all moot, because yeah, the thing half as massive goes twice as fast, it covers twice as much distance in the same amount of time, and no evidence of it going 4 times further, no evidence of any disproportion. So as long as you're not using friction to measure energy, you'll get nice honest answers. But that's real physics. But they don't care. Decisive way. The cars show only... Alright, so I bring up the Mythbusters video that just kind of shows, frankly, pretty clearly that even though it's not the myth they were after, it's the myth they debunked. They showed that there's no evidence of kinetic energy. Crash a car at 50 miles an hour into a brick wall, crash it at 100 miles into a brick wall. There's no evidence that the 100-mile-an-hour crash had twice as much energy. 4 times as much energy. Just twice. It crushes twice as much. It doesn't crush 4 times as much. I'm going to have 10 for the volume, and I'm going to have 5 for the velocity. Alright, and then I do the pressure argument again with cylinders. It just proves the displacement. It proves the thing has to come out that way. You can make a 10-ton train going 5 miles an hour. You can make a 5-ton train going 10 miles an hour out of its energy. Clearly, it can't have half as much energy. How could it possibly create something with twice as much energy? That would be free energy. So of course that can't happen in the real universe that would have twice as much energy, but it is a fact that I can convert 10-ton train going 5 miles an hour into 5-ton train going 10 miles an hour. I can do the conversion with a lever or with pressurized cylinders or with springs. I can do it. The fact that I can do it means your theory of energy can't be the right answer, because then it would be free energy, and we wouldn't... the whole world would be a different place if that free energy was that easy. It's a decisive kill. 1/2 mv squared is nonsense. The sooner you admit it, the better. Why are you waiting? Why are you saying, well, we'll leave things alone? It's wrong. It's decisively and completely and idiotically wrong. It's obviously wrong. Levers prove it to be wrong. It's way past time to say whoops and get it done. Just admit, wow, that's really dumb. We made that mistake. Because they're cowards. And the regular people suck because they're just sheeple. Yeah, so that's all it is. It's just the frickin' ivory tower propagandists for this bullshit universe, this woo-averse, are cowards, and the sycophants are just stupid and idol worshippers. And it's disgusting. And sad and depressing. But I will endeavor to persevere. I can only do my job, and I'll continue to do it. And such. So, those were the videos this week-ish. There's some others. What's the point? Yeah. Anyway, I don't think there's many others. But anyway. Alright, so, till the next time, I don't know what else I can do. I email people, I offer people, I pay you for your time. I just want you to try to make some sort of, compose me the argument. Make the physics says counter argument to what I'm arguing. Explain how 2 waves can create 2 patterns. Show me. They won't do it. Or show me that you can't. Have the balls to just show up and say, yeah, no, you're right, I can't do that. There's no finagling I can do where I can make 2 openings with just 2 waves coming out, make the complex double slit pattern. There's just no geometry that'll do that. I have to have 4 waves. I can't do it with 2 waves. And once you've admitted that, frankly, it's over. Because then you're acknowledging that the surfaces are the point sources. The surfaces is where all the action happens. The photons that make the fringes are all surface photons. They have nothing to do with the middle of the slit. They have nothing to do with going through the slit. It all has to do with going near the surface. The surface is causing the effect. Obviously. I mean, it's so fucking obvious. Like, what do you change? Okay, I make a circle smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. What do I change? I change the odds of the photon hitting near a surface, right? The smaller I make this opening, I'm taking away the empty space, and I'm saying it's a higher and higher probability that the photon has to go near the surface. So I'm guaranteeing the creation of the fringes. Duh. Alright. Shit. Just so depressing. Alright, so this has been a draftphysics.com video presentation. Debate physics also, but people just won't do it. Nothing. 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 You know, amazing. They can't compose a rational counter argument on the subject at all.